Right, so a couple of months ago, in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade being overturned, we had one of our Supreme Court justices, Clarence Thomas, who was a deranged right-wing lunatic, come out and basically indicate that there was a possibility that in the near future, the Supreme Court could also be overturning gay marriage. And so in response to that, we had a push from the Biden administration and from largely Democrats, but also some Republicans in Congress to codify gay marriage into federal law so that if the Supreme Court did inevitably overturn it, that it would still be protected. Okay, so I got an update here because they have officially managed to pull this off. Okay, so here from the New York Times. They say bill to protect same-sex marriage right clears Congress. So just a little bit of details here, and then I'm going to get into this absolutely hilarious video from a Republican who was literally on the floor of Congress crying and shitting and pissing her pants at the idea that gay people would have the right to get married in this country. Okay, so first, just a little bit of details here real quick. They say the House on Thursday gave final approval to legislation to mandate federal recognition for same-sex marriages, with a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers voting in favor of the measure in the waning days of the Democratic-led Congress. With a vote of 258 to 169, the landmark legislation cleared Congress, sending it to President Biden to be signed into law and capping an improbable path for a measure that only months ago appeared to have little chance at enactment. It was the second time in 5 months that the House had taken up the Respect for Marriage Act, which is what they're calling it. And honestly, I like the framing here from calling it this, the Respect for Marriage Act. I mean, this is something that obviously members of Congress do with every single bill that they pass. They're always going to try to give it their little spin and, like, calling the Patriot Act, for example, the Patriot Act, instead of it being like the gigantic, widespread spying on the American people in violation of your Civil Rights Act or something like that, right? They always put their spin on it. And I think that this is a good one given the pushback from a lot of conservatives who are basically saying that this is going to utterly destroy marriage in this country, okay, and take down Western civilization along with it. So calling it the Respect for Marriage Act is, I think, a good play there. But they continue saying, last summer, 47 House Republicans joined Democrats in support of the legislation, a level of GOP enthusiasm for same-sex marriage rights that had surprised and delighted its supporters. That set off an intensive effort among a bipartisan group of proponents in the Senate, boosted quietly by a coalition of influential Republican donors and operatives, some of them being gay themselves, to find 10 Republican votes necessary in the chamber to move it forward. And this is also kind of interesting because, the fact that you have some Republican donors and operatives behind the scenes actually pushing for gay marriage is obviously, kind of a surprising phenomenon when at the same time you have a lot of these Republican politicians and pundits like Ben Shapiro just a couple days ago was out here saying that any Republican who voted in favor of gay marriage should be excised from the party. Okay, so there's a huge split between some Republicans who recognize that this should just be a basic fundamental right and some Republicans who are thinking that this is the collapse of the entire nation. But they say in the Senate, the legislation was revised to address concerns among some Republicans that it would punish or restrict religious freedom of institutions that refuse to recognize same-sex marriages. That version passed last month, forcing it back to the House for a second vote to approve the changes. So, I mean, obviously, as they're pointing out here, there were some exemptions that were included in this bill. That was basically the only way you were going to get some of these Republicans on board with it. I'm going to give you a little bit more details in terms of what those actual exemptions are, but just at a fundamental level, I think that these arguments are kind of weak. I mean, obviously, I think that people have a right, in your own personal life to, have these views that you want to, whether you're being homophobic or you just, think that marriage is something that should only be between a man and a woman. That's fine. You don't have to be involved in a gay marriage, okay? So passing, respecting the right for other people to get married in other types of relationships has absolutely no bearing on you as an individual. And so giving this exemption to some religious institutions or churches to not have gay weddings or something like that, it's okay, is it the biggest deal? Probably not. You're probably going to be able to find some churches or some places where you're still going to be able to have your ceremony and all of that good stuff. I honestly don't know why, if you are if you are a gay person who's planning to get married, why you would want to be involved with a church that doesn't respect your right to be who you are as a person. But obviously those are the caveats that are coming with this. I think it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, would you say the same thing about racial marriages between a black and a white person or something like that? With interracial marriages, would you say, okay, churches that don't believe that black people are on the same level as white people, they should be able to deny them the ability to have an interracial marriage within their church? I don't think anybody would buy that. I just think that this issue of LGBTQ rights is kind of lagging behind some of those other things. But Anyways, they continue saying that the revisions appeared to have failed to build support for the bill among Republicans in the House, and on Thursday, fewer Republicans supported it than in July. Okay, so what happened in that interim period, right? Because you had these additional measures that were added to it specifically to appease some of those Republicans, but more of them backed off on this most recent vote. Now, what I think actually happened there is that they saw a lot of pushback from maybe their most stringent evangelical base of supporters, and so maybe they thought, okay, this isn't going to be the best optical look here for me, but whatever, it is what it is. It ended up passing anyways. But they continue saying the push to pass the legislation began, again, as I was pointing out, after Justice Clarence Thomas suggested in his opinion back in June, ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade which had established a constitutional right to abortion, that the court also should reconsider precedents enshrining marriage equality and access to contraception. But what began as a messaging exercise for Democrats eager to highlight social issues during the midterm elections turned into a serious legislative push after a much higher number of House Republicans than anyone had expected voted in favor of the measure, and after an intensive lobbying effort that culminated after the elections, the Senate passed the legislation with the support of 12 Republicans. Okay, so just a little bit more info here in terms of what these exemptions are, and then we'll get into the video. They say this victory was achieved because the Respect for Marriage Act also includes important principles of religious freedom for those who don't endorse same-sex marriage itself, while the measure repeals the Defense of Marriage Act and ensures same-sex marriages can't be denied to any person acting under color of state law. So the government can't prevent you from getting this marriage, but they say the act also protects churches and religious organizations from being forced to perform gay weddings or marriages or provide services for celebrations that go against their faith's teachings. And they say additionally the bill is explicit in not affecting the tax-exempt status of churches or religious schools, and it doesn't diminish or abrogate any religious freedom protections already provided under existing federal law and the Constitution. And finally, the bill acknowledges that traditional views on marriage are held by reasonable and sincere people based on decent and honorable religious or philosophical premises. Okay, I think that is entirely bullshit. There is no, real underlying justification for hating gay people or thinking that they don't have a right to get married. The Bible is not a good moral compass if you actually read it. I mean, I, have a little bit of credibility in saying that because I went to a religious Catholic school from kindergarten all the way through high school. I've read the Bible. I know some of the fucked up shit that is within the Bible, all of the various contradictions. It's not exactly a good moral compass, and anybody who is weaponizing this book, the Bible, to justify being homophobic, it's completely ridiculous and absurd, and nobody should, accept that as being some sort of like a, deeply based, sincere, decent and honorable thing. Okay, so with that being said, let's just go ahead and get into this absolutely hilarious clip here from this Republican representative, Rep. Vicky Hartzler, who is going to break down in tears over this fact that this is, being brought to the floor. So let's just go ahead and jump into this.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you my priority. Protect religious liberty. Protect people of faith, and protect Americans who believe in the true meaning of marriage. I hope and pray that my colleagues will find the courage to join me in opposing this misguided and this dangerous bill. And I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
Okay, so, I mean, yeah, obviously, cope and seethe and, go cry and piss your pants at home. It's not that big of a fucking deal. Okay, we're talking about respecting the ability for, people who happen to be gay to be involved in marriages. And, there's so many other things to say about that because it's not just about the symbolism of this entire situation. There are also, like, a bunch of different benefits that you get from the government if you are involved in a marriage, and a whole bunch of other things that are also important, like if you are in a gay relationship or you are married to somebody of the same sex, then you get added benefits or, added things like if they end up getting sick or they're on their deathbed, you have visitation rights. You could potentially be involved in the decision making for what the response to that type of situation should be. There's a whole bunch of other like tax related things and a whole host of different benefits that come from being able to get married. So it's not even just about like the symbolism of equality and freedom for the LGBTQ community. It has a whole bunch of other things that are are vitally important as part of this discussion as well. So, I mean, the idea that you're getting up there and you're crying in front of everybody at the idea that gay people might be able to get married, I mean, by the response that I've seen from some conservatives, whether it's pundits or politicians, I mean, you would think that this law was forcing every single person in the country to get married to another person of the same sex. I mean, like, that's how they freak out about this, as if this is going to destroy the country, as if this is going to destroy their own marriages. I mean, what does it have to do with you if some gay couple wants to get married? How does that affect your life in any way, shape, or form? It's just part of this grand, conspiracy that feeds into these, Republican policies and their ideology that, like, the Western world or the United States is under attack by some far left radicals. I mean, this is just a very basic thing. You would have thought that this was something we could have moved on from a long time ago. Obviously, Justice Clarence Thomas had disagreements with that. That's the only reason why this was even brought up in the first place. If he hadn't come out and said that, there would have been basically no reason to even advance this piece of legislation as aggressively as they ended up doing. But it's good that they did it, because it's certainly possible the Supreme Court could reverse that at some point in the future. And now you have it enshrined into law. And, we nudge this country, I guess, marginally on this social issue specifically in the right direction.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying